basically like the big index is just I think not a very attractive. And I kind of view us as being in a lost decade where I just don't think the 2020s decade from the recent, peak in 2021, I don't think it's going to be looked back on as a very good decade, especially in inflation adjusted terms, and probably not that great in nominal terms either. And I think this year is kind of a microcosm of that, where I'm not necessarily expecting massive crashes unless officials try to cause like a absolutely severe liquidity crisis. But I'm also not expecting very bullishness action either. I think it'll be very sector specific, and I think a lot of things are just going to be grindy and sideways and choppy and volatile. And sideways can mean down 20%, up 20% in a given area.
Yeah.
And just, when you look back a year from now, 5 years from now, you're kind of like, well, what did we didn't really go anywhere.
The United States Federal Reserve is currently running at a loss and is only a few months away from having negative tangible equity, for the first time in modern history. The Federal Reserve manages the Excel spreadsheet that represents the financial system in the United States and, by extension, the rest of the world. Simply put, it is that. The spreadsheet includes both assets and liabilities, with some cells representing the former and others the latter. They maintain, and we all use a simple ledger. To maintain high interest rates is to invite a downward. The crisis of sovereign debt hyperinflation could result from a reduction in interest rates or a switch to quantitative easing. This dilemma has brought the current fiat monetary era to its breaking point, and the prospect of economic collapse is arguably greater than it has ever been. Lyn discusses the interest rate and safe haven investments like gold in this video. She also provides her macro outlook on the cryptocurrency market and discusses bonds and yield.
Yeah, we had 40 years of declining interest rates, which means, one, you got higher corporate profit margins, but then you also had higher valuations placed on those earnings. And so you had multiple tailwinds causing everything to go up together for like 40 years. And just going forward, I think some of those tailwinds are gone now. We don't really have the benefits of globalization we have over the past 30 years. We don't have the tailwind of ever lower interest rates. And so I think a lot of that is behind us. And now things are in a grindier environment, at least this decade. And that requires more careful sector analysis, more careful company analysis. It's also like when things are the top of the range, you can like sell covered calls to get extra income and extract kind of more value out of that position. When things have a big down move, you can maybe move, some of your T-bill position back into the market. There's different things you can do to kind of adjust to the ebbs and the flows. And there are sectors that, for example, on the opposite side of this bank problem, for example, like certain energy pipelines, right? What they, like energy product, for example, like EPD, what they did was Enterprise Products Partners, that's the rate. So what they did was basically they borrowed an average rate of 20 years at a pretty low interest rate. And then they have all this, real asset exposure. And so they have, 25 years of distribution increases. They yield over 7%. They have all this low fixed rate debt. And so they're kind of sitting on the opposite side of what all these banks are dealing with, where they lent at long durations at low rates. So one thing to look for is what areas borrowed for long duration at low rates that are fixed and that have variable or real asset underpinnings. And so those are the ones that I think can grind out an advantage over this decade, where they're not reliant on interest rates coming down. They're not reliant on ever higher valuations. They're just operating profitable businesses with their debt denominated in like negative real rates, right, and returning capital to shareholders.
Right now.
Yeah. And so I think that there's, between covered calls, whatever tools that an investor's familiar with kind of grinding through a sideways decade I think is the type of action to be familiar with here. I think T-bills, money markets, those are some of the best low volatility defensive assets. I think gold is attractive here. It's possible that gold stagnates for a little bit because, there was a recent buying pressure into gold that might, settle out and normalize for a period of time. But I think that as the Fed kind of finishes their hawkish cycle, I think it's attractive for gold. Like I said, some of those income producing assets that have kind of low fixed rate debt are attractive. And that's kind of the general approach here. I think I've been watching energy producers lately, energy and energy producers, because a lot of that was sold off sharply with the banking crisis. I think some of that's overdone to the downside.
Hmm.
Um, Now, I'm still hesitant to be super bullish on energy with a somewhat recessionary outlook. So I kind of caveat that with, I'm not saying we can't see lower, but I am both long-term bullish on some of those, and even in the intermediate sense, I think it's somewhat overdone to the downside. So I think it's worth shopping around or looking around in that space in the weeks and months ahead for, anything that crashes in that space could be a interesting purchase. There's certain tail risks that can happen with the longer duration assets. I mean, if the market, especially the next inflation cycle, if the market perceives that the Fed's kind of given up on their inflation fight, and they expect longer inflation, like basically higher inflation for longer, some of those long duration yields could actually have an upward move. I don't really expect that right away, but it's something I'd be concerned about. I still think that long duration bonds are basically going to give you a lot of volatility without a lot of returns this decade.
Hmm.
And so, a trader can make use of them, but I'd be pretty careful with them. Sure, I view it as two very different ecosystems. There's kind of the Bitcoin ecosystem that I'm pretty bullish on long term. If you look at globally what's happening, Bitcoin and certain stable coins are often used as utility assets. I mean, if people in Nigeria, people in Lebanon, people in Argentina, a lot of people want these types of assets. And some of the development work that's happening on the Bitcoin stack, I think, is really interesting. And so, especially with the Fed, kind of, at least kind of near-term peak hawkishness kind of priced into the market. I wouldn't be surprised to see Bitcoin just chop along for a period of time. But I think a lot of the leverage has been washed out. A lot of the kind of the tourists are out of the space. And I'm kind of bullish on that space with a 3 to 5 year view. As for the kind of the rest of the crypto space, I just don't really touch it. I don't think it's, there's all sorts of regulatory uncertainties. Coins come and go. They all have their pump and dumps, their moment in the sun. A lot of them are centralized. The VCs actively promote them while using them to get out of their positions. We see increasing regulatory action. We just saw, for example, Binance under pressure legally. Really, that kind of whole casino crypto yield space is just not attractive to me. There's elements of innovation that are happening that I think, as things blow up, maybe that can be taken and put somewhere else. But really, that whole kind of playground of that crypto casino thing is just not an area that I really go into. I think Bitcoin is basically the signal in that space.
What do you think of the macro outlook of the economy at this time? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for watching this video on Market Empire. We hope you found Lyn Alden's forecast on how to prepare for the worst in today's market informative and thought-provoking. If you enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing to our channel for more insights and analysis on the world of finance and investing. Don't forget to hit the like button. We'll see you in the next video.